Okay, welcome everyone to our LinkedIn Live. I'm Bruce Eckfeldt. I'm going to do a quick intro. I'm going to introduce our guests, and then we'll get into our questions. So our topic today, we came up with this title, Why You Shouldn't Open a Restaurant After You Sell a Business. So we'll get into the meaning of the title, and really what we want to get into is how you kind of handle exits, what do you do post-exit, and some of the experiences that I think we've individually had, and then a lot of the experiences we've had working with entrepreneurs, with CEOs, with founders going through the process. We want to share some things and really talk about it. I think it's an interesting discussion, and I think it's something a lot of people don't think about. So hopefully we'll create some interesting value here and some good takeaways for folks. So before I introduce our guests, I just want to say anyone who's watching this on LinkedIn, we are going to be watching comments. So if you have a comment you want to throw into the mix here, throw it into the comments on the LinkedIn page. We will get it. We'll try to work it into the conversation. If you are on YouTube, jump over to LinkedIn if you want to leave comments. I'm not watching the comments on YouTube, but I know we are streaming over there as well. And also, if you are watching the replay on either platform, we will be watching the comments on LinkedIn for the coming days and weeks. So if you're watching the replay and you have a comment or question, throw it onto the page, and we'll come back and we'll monitor those. And if there's something there that we need to respond to, we will try to get to that. So that's kind of our audience instructions. Let's meet our guests, and we'll go into get into our topics. So first up, we have Kevin Donnelly. Kevin is a serial entrepreneur. He's an investor. He's also an advisor. He's built and sold two different businesses, one to a publicly traded company, and most recently he sold PremiseLink, which is a national tech services firm, to a private equity organization. And he now helps founders grow, helps grow their business, prepare for exits, and has done a lot of work in the space. Kevin and I knew each other from EO for many years, so I'm excited to have Kevin on the program. Kevin, thanks for joining us today.
Great, happy to be here.
We also have Rich Russakoff on here. He's a globally recognized business coach and M&A expert, and he's worked with hundreds of high-growth entrepreneurs, including many Inc. 500 and EY award winners. He brings decades of experience in building, selling, and advising companies. Rich and I have known each other for a little while, and I'm excited to have him on this program as well. Rich, welcome.
I'm delighted to be here.
Thanks for joining us. So let's get into it. I loved our title because I think it comes kind of from experiences not only that I think we've had in kind of getting involved in businesses right after we sell businesses, but I think it's pretty common. I think a lot of founders, CEOs who sell businesses kind of end up in the situation of what do I do next? I guess let's kind of hear from each of you, like, why do you think this is a challenge? Like, why do you think this is an important topic, right? Like, you sell a business, you're kind of figuring out what to do next. Why does this become something that founders really need to think about before they actually sell their business? Like, what are they going to do next? So, Kevin, I'm kind of curious to hear from you, because I know our title was somewhat derived from experiences that you had, but give us your take on kind of the post-exit situation.
Well, you know, they say the statistic is, well, first of all, for people that try to sell their business, the big number they say is about 80% of the businesses never sell. So only 20% do sell. And of those 20% that do sell, 80% of those people regret the sale. So I've done the math. If you take 80% of 20%, you got about a 1 in 100 chance, you know, of having a great exit. And I think that, you know, I'm kind of plotting a book that I've been noodling on writing. That the title is called Exit Curious. And the idea is that in order to have what I call an epic exit, which an epic exit is one that you sell on your own terms, and we'll talk a lot about terms today, right? And what role you're going to play going forward, for maximum value with no regrets. In order to kind of check those three boxes, you need to be really curious, and you need to ask a lot of questions. And I know for me, and for many entrepreneurs, like, your business becomes your identity, and sometimes you don't even realize it. And it's even exacerbated for some people whose name is on the company, right? My company Speedwire, I had for 20 years. I was a kid when I started it, and after 20 years, and I sold the bit, you know, it was an unsolicited offer. Now there's kind of this whole cottage industry of exit planning and helping people think through things. But back
Yeah.
then I was 44 years old. Business was taken off my hands very quickly. I worked for the acquiring business for 2 years. And then when they released the escrow, about 24 hours later, I resigned and I left. And,
Mhm.
and then I really didn't know what was next. And, you know, for me, it was my wife, you know, went through breast cancer. And so thank God we caught it early, and she's great now. But we were having this life is short moment. And she's like, you want to open a restaurant? Screw it. Open a restaurant. It's going to be great. And at the time, you know, after just having a big exit, man, I thought I was so smart. You know, everyone's warning me, don't do it, don't do it. I'm like, no, it's going to be different for me. And sure enough, it was a full 3-year side road that I didn't need to go down, and it was a humbling experience. And so I think that you know, if I could wind the clock back, I would have done things a lot differently. But you know, I learned a lot, and but I think really the cautionary tale is to really you know, think through what's next, what's going to be fulfilling. And for me, I really enjoyed creating the restaurant. You know, it was like an artistic endeavor, but then the day it opened, it was just like I was trapped in jail.
Yeah. You built your own prison.
You're in prison, and I was like, oh, this is terrible. And then and you know, success in business comes from nuances. And so being a rookie restaurateur, I got 8 out of the 10 things right, but the two that I didn't, you know, the nuances kind of killed me. And so so I think, you know, that's part of what I do as a coach now, is helping people think through. I became a certified exit planner, helping people think through what's next. And I think that's the most important thing, is to ask yourself the questions and put the time in, because to have really a great, you know, you're trying to solve for a great life, and thinking through what's going to make a great life is really where the deep thinking needs to come from, and asking lots of questions.
Yeah. I'm curious, Rich, I know you've worked with many, you know, founders, entrepreneurs, and I've helped them, you know, through this process quite a bit. Like, what do you see as being the common mistakes or things that they get wrong in terms of post-exit?
Well, I want to start that after I sold my business, and I sold it to the wrong buyer, and I left a lot of money on the table as a result.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what I didn't know about the selling process. I want to get back to Kevin. Kevin and I have been very close. We talked about what he was doing, and in hindsight, I think 2 of the things was the business was seasonal, and seasonal is really tough.
Yeah.
And also, was it the right product for the location? And the third thing was the model you went after was a great model, but what you didn't know about the restaurant business was the cost of goods, and the cost of that seafood was much higher than in a normal business other than the restaurant. So part of that is, I would have advised, if you wanted to do a restaurant after you sold a restaurant, work for a restaurant.
Yeah.
Work in it. See the things that you don't see from the outside. But when I was a broker, brokering businesses between buyers and sellers, the first thing I asked a seller when I was listing their business was, what will you do after you sell? And if they didn't know what they would do after they sold, that was a real red flag for me.
Yep.
That being said, what I like to tell sellers is take a year off. When friends of mine and clients sell a business, give yourself time to unwind, rethink, to find out who you are outside of Speedwire or outside of your business, to find yourself, to recharge, regroup, relax before you move forward.
Yeah, I think there's kind of 2 interesting ideas here that I'd love to kind of dig into. One is this idea of identity, right? And I think I think Kevin, you mentioned it, right? Like a lot of founders, typically founders, first-time founders, you know, it's your identity is so wrapped up in these businesses. And I think people underestimate the kind of personal kind of impact, the emotional impact a sale has, and kind of the process you need to go through and kind of reconstructing your ego and kind of identity, you know, post-sale. The other one is, I think you do end up in this kind of feeling like you've got a little bit of a Midas touch, right? Like you just sold a business, right? Like that's a pretty rarefied and pretty important kind of accomplishment. And it's easy to be like, I just sold a business. I can do anything. And like you feeling like you can kind of get into any business and just make it work because you've just sold something. What are some of the things that
Bruce, that also applies when you decide to open up the second and the third business because you made the Inc. 500 and you think you have that Midas touch. That's a really critical concept for entrepreneurs to get over, because you sure get humility quickly.
Yeah. Well, so how are there ways that you can kind of prepare founders for that process? Because I know we all work with founders that are kind of going through this and kind of, go through exits, and like we know it's going to happen at some level. Is there anything you do that helps either minimize the chances of that happening or minimize the impact of those things happening post exit?
The smartest thing I did after I sold my business was go to Europe for 3.5 months. And it took my mind away from the business. It opened up other ideas for me. And when I came back, I knew I was fascinated with how businesses change hands. So I joined a business brokerage firm in Richmond, Virginia. But taking that time totally away from what you were doing, I think is invaluable for any seller of a business. Yeah. Also, there's 3 times to sell a business. 1, when you want out, and that's when you get the least amount of money. 2, when your business is really ready to be sold. And 3, you get the most money when the market is ready for you. And again, that's what happened with Kevin with his first business. The market came to him because the business had things that the buyer wanted and other buyers would have wanted as well.
The right business at the right time. Kevin, I mean, if you think about your own experiences and to the extent that you work with some of these folks on this, is there any strategies or techniques you kind of help put in place so that they're less likely to make some of these mistakes post-exit?
Really, if you think about in EO, we're very lucky. We get exposed to lots of different exercises, things like the life wheel. And, so there's, there's a lot, like I shared, there's a kind of this cottage industry that's springing up. And there's a great book by, I think his name is Scott Snyder, who runs the Exit Planning Institute, and it's called Walking to Destiny. And really the concept around exit planning is that they call it 3 legs of the stool. So there's a personal leg, which we've been talking about, which is what am I going to do next, getting clarity. And then there's a business, which is what do I need to do to maximize the value of the business. And then there's the financial that says, okay, how's all this going to work? And where you're kind of doing the math that says, if I sell for $10 million and I pay taxes, my proceeds will be this. And then you apply the 4% rule. Then you say, all right, is this going to be enough cash flow to live on? Yeah. I think the most important thing is really understanding what your business sale is going to do financially. Is it enough that you don't have to work? Because if it's not enough, and then you're going to start from scratch and have to make a living doing something else, that's a big challenge. And you may be better off, holding on to the business. And so what I'd like to apply is Simon Sinek in his book, Start With Why, as the golden circle, right? And so the idea is if you start with the why and you really understand, okay, why do I want to exit the business? And making sure that you're being pulled towards a vision for a future that's bigger than your past versus being pushed from a situation where you're not enjoying the business or things are miserable. Yeah. And as you guys know, as super coaches, right, that a lot of times that miserableness that an entrepreneur is feeling is because they don't have the operating system, they don't have the right people on the team, right? There's like this irony that creating a business that's sellable, that's valuable for others, that private equity wants to buy. There's like paradoxes. Once you get it to this place where you have options, it's more valuable to you than anybody else, because a business that's sellable is one that, kicks ass without you being in the middle of everything.
Yeah.
And once you get that, why sell it? And so
I mean, it's funny. I'm actually in LA right now.
Kevin, I couldn't agree with you more. That's going from mom and pop to a professional company, and a professional company can run without you. And when you can achieve that, or when you can achieve it where you can run it on your terms. So I had a former client say, Rich, the best advice you ever gave me was to not sell my business. It was a service business. The multiple would have been about 3 times earnings. So in 3 years, he would have made as much money as he did on the sale. He had a great team, and his job became coming in with pizza 1 day a week and writing a newsletter. And he's living a wonderful life. He's doing whatever he wants with his life. And that is very difficult to achieve. But if you achieve it, think twice before you let it go. Or maybe 3 times before you let it go.
I would say I'm actually in LA right now working with a company where it started as, we got to sell this business. You want it out, right? Like, it was like, I'm miserable. And a year later, it's like, this is amazing, right? Like, we've got a professional leadership team in place. There's a lot of growth opportunity. And, a lot of times that when you get that push, like, people want out because they're miserable. If you can actually kind of sit in the business and figure out, how do I actually develop a strategy, create a real growth plan, put in professional management, right? It's now something that is a great asset. And the other one I always love is this idea is, you're always the other buyer, right? So even if you have an unsolicited offer and it's like, I only have one person on the table, you're always the other buyer, right? So in terms of, like, who am I going to sell the business to? I can sell it back to myself, right? And you want to create a business that is desirable. And a lot of times you're like, no, I want to keep it, right? And, there's always an opportunity in the future, but especially, I was going to come back to something Kevin said, which is, if this is going to be your exit, that means you don't have to work, you really need to think about the numbers, right? And a lot of people don't really think through the numbers, particularly if they're a younger founder. The other one too is, you got to realize most entrepreneurs are unemployable, right? Like, they can't go work for another company, right? It's just, you're tainted, right? Like, and so, you really need to think about, okay, if this is not my real, sets me up for life number, and I do, particularly if your set point is very high, if you're used to $1 million lifestyle, right? You've got to put 20, 30 million, cash at the end of all this transaction to be able to support that lifestyle. If you're not going to be able to do that, and you're not willing to reduce your income and your lifestyle level, you got to make money, and you got to figure out, well, where are you going to make that? And if you're, an early 40s exit, you've got 30, 40, 50 years potentially, of time to kind of figure out what you're going to do with it.
I am working with a friend right now who I used to coach, very high up in EO, and she is so frustrated with her business and the demands it's making on her. And she said she wanted to sell. I said, what do you want to sell it for? She said, $1 million. I said, are you nuts? Your EBITDA is significantly greater. Why would you sell it for $1 million? She said, I want out. I said, that will scare buyers.
Yeah.
And you are selling yourself short. I did a quick and dirty valuation on the business. It's worth $6 million, easily on the market. It's been there 20 years. It has clients that continue to come back. She's got a good staff. She's just exhausted. And that mindset not only works against you when you're looking for a buyer, but it scares a buyer. What's going on? Why are you selling it so cheap?
Something must be wrong. Yeah.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about some of these other terms. I mean, Kevin, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, and you had an earnout, right? There was a post transaction, you were still involved in the business in some capacity. I always find this is an interesting one because on one hand, earnouts are there to kind of protect the buyer in terms of ongoing performance of the company because they're retaining, the founder in some capacity. But oftentimes it's, founders go into this thing, it's like, yeah, like I'm getting more money, I'll do an earnout. And then a couple months in the earnout, they're ready to pull their hair, out of their head, right? Like it can be really frustrating. Kevin, I guess give me a little sense of what was your thinking going into your earnout, or what was the kind of the dynamic around negotiating an earnout and then the actual earnout itself? Like, what did you learn, or what's kind of the reflection on that for you?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. I had we had an unsolicited offer, and then I kind of quickly hired a investment banker, and we put a book together, and we kind of blasted it out. And I ended up selling to the buyer that was a strategic buyer. But I did have an offer from a financial buyer, and that offer was higher. And I actually turned that offer down and went with the strategic buyer because with the strategic buyer, they were a competitor and they were in the same business. And the day I sold, they gave me like the dream job. They were like, you just go out and try and find us some new customers. I reported directly to the CEO. I had no people I had to manage. It was awesome. And had I gone with the financial buyer, it was going to be 5 years with a gun to my head and pressure to produce. And so really thinking through what, do you want, again, to the questions about being, exit curious, do you want to stay and try and make opportunity for upside, or do you really want to go do something else with your life? So that's the first decision. But if you decide that you want to stay, you guys, the cliches around EO is and YPO is quite often with the earnout piece, pretend like you're not going to get it, right? Yeah. Because there's a lot of times it's subjective. You're not in charge, you're in control of it anymore. They try and make the earnout based on net profit, which absolutely there's no control of. And sometimes, you could do an earnout based on top line, but that's rare. So I would just say really it's more about understanding what you want to do with your life. And then when you decide, okay, I do want to stay in the game, I think what gets more interesting nowadays is 10 years ago, private equity wasn't as predominant. And now it's all about not as much an earnout, but more about rolling chips with the next bite at the apple. And I think
retained equity. Yeah.
That's when it becomes really interesting and exciting, honestly.
Yeah. Rich, what's your take on earnouts?
One of my former clients and close friend sold a business. It wasn't for sale. He talked to the buyer. They loved what he had. He had another software program he was developing. They said, he got $12 million at the sale and 12% of the company for a flip in 3 years. And they were going to keep him on for a while, and they were a disaster. They had no idea how to run what he had or the potential for what he was going to have. And what also happens to keep in mind is your top people may leave you the other company within 6 months to a year because it's not the same culture. And there's a couple ways to help solve that. One, help the buyer by having an employee sign an agreement, 2 agreements. One says they'll stay on for a year and you're going to give them a piece of the sale for doing it. And one say they'll resign so the buyer doesn't have to let them go. But my client regrets so much selling it was they took the business down the tubes. And I wrote a post a little while ago, instead of buyer beware, seller beware. Who are you selling it to? And do they really get what you're doing? And do they have the right people in place to make it happen? And what else are they doing that will take their focus away from your baby.
Yeah. My general kind of approach to this is that you have to, if you're going to do a deal with an earnout, you have to be willing to walk away from the earnout at any point in time, right? If you need the earnout, if you're attached to the earnout, that's where it becomes a problem, right? That's where you're going to be miserable. Like you get in these situations where, it's like people end up in jail, right? For years trying to do these earnouts. Let's talk about some of the other terms, because I think another one that comes up for me are these non-competes and non-solicitations and things like that. And I've had a couple of cases where even if it's an all-cash deal and there's no actual earnout, these terms end up binding founders post-exit in ways they don't necessarily anticipate. Like I had one case where they agreed to, I think it was a 3-year kind of non-compete, but they ended up getting in trouble for it, like advising companies that the buyers end up saying they were competitive, right? They were could be conceived as competitive, and so they didn't realize how restrictive some of these things would be. And particularly if you're ambitious to kind of want to go off and start other companies, like what are some of the other terms that you look at or think about in terms of the deal that ends up impacting a founder's ability to kind of take the next step or kind of write a next chapter in their lives? Is there anything that comes up for you when you look at these deals and term sheets? Kevin, anything on your side?
No, Rich, what comes up for you?
Well, certainly the non-compete is the most important thing.
Yeah.
And that's where I would focus. There are things I think that are important as you're going into the close of the sale. I had a client that was selling their business. It was supposed to close on the 25th of the month. The lawyer held it up. It didn't close till the 15th of the next month. It cost him $600,000 in salaries that he wouldn't have had to pay.
Yeah.
So being on top of your team, having the right attorneys, the sense of urgency, the right financial people can make a huge difference. And also preparing for the sale by audited financials or reviewed financials make it easy for the buyer. That's what I think you ought to start looking at as early as possible. What do I need to do to get my house in order?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm a big fan of doing mock due diligence, on the company early and just uncovering all the things. The other one, I have founders, I put together a list of all the reasons why you shouldn't buy my company, right? Like all the kind of hair and the skeletons and things like that, because I want to get that to a potential buyer right up front. Because I think one of the things that really kills deals, or certainly makes them more complicated, but it can kill a lot of deals, is when kind of these issues kind of trickle into the conversation over time. So it's like, oh, well, a couple of weeks into due diligence or something comes up. It's like, oh, well, yeah, we've got this one client and they've threatened to sue us or something. Or I've got this one employee that we don't have a non-compete on or something. It's like, I want to get all those things up front and put them right on the table with a potential buyer. So they feel like, okay, I know what I'm dealing with, and I'm not going to have this kind of waiting for other shoes to kind of drop during the process.
Bruce, that is a marvelous idea, and it applies not just to whether they buy, but if they buy and do well, I did it all. If I didn't do well, you're the problem, and how can I sue you? So that's the other part, I think, of protecting yourself. From you didn't disclose this, I didn't know this, and if I had, I wouldn't have bought it. And then you get into lawsuits, and that's how.
Yeah.
And disclosures are a key part of this whole process.
That slows the deal down, and what really is the deal killer ultimately is loss of momentum. When this thing's going, it's got to keep on going like the train. You stop the train, chances are the deal's gonna die. And the other thing I see most often is financials. You know, before you sell the business, you got to have tight financials, and you got to have, you know, accurate numbers. And because a sophisticated buyer is going to, you know, try and tear it apart and understand as your, you know, what business unit are you making a lot of your money on, and versus, you know, things like that. And I just see the most often is that 8 out of 10 companies just have terrible financials, and it's probably the biggest deal killer out there.
Yeah. We're going to hit time. I want to make sure that people get contact information. Kevin, if people want to find out more about you, what you're doing, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah. Kevin at kevindonnelly.me.
Excellent. We'll make sure that that's in the on the LinkedIn page, and obviously we're all connected on LinkedIn here too, so you can get us there. Rich, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Rich at Coach to the Best. That's because I coach Kevin. Coach to the Best.
Perfect. If people want to get a hold of me, just Bruce at eckfeldt.com. Eckfeldt.com is my URL. Rich, Kevin, thank you so much for taking the time today. This has been a pleasure.
Yeah, a lot of fun. Thanks, guys.
You.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.